You think about a seat at the table, we want you to understand the dynamics, the subject matter experts, the experience, the purpose, and the peace that we hope this will bring to you as a social change agent here at Rolling Out. This evening is no different. If you've been watching, you know that we had the mayor of Atlanta. And now, for those of you who haven't read a Birmingham jail, you might want to begin to understand what it is to sacrifice a moment. For 400 years, our community has been in some type of systematic jail. For all our achievements, we've been underappreciated. For all our achievements, our brothers and sisters like Breonna Taylor have continued to suffer in the light of the light, in the broad daylight. There is no one that has been brought to justice. We all continue to go. But what sacrifice? What would you give? What would you share with the world? What statement would you make with your actions? Here at the seat of the table, we've invited Reverend Stephen A. Green to share with us the insight, the understanding that what happens when those of us truly have a calling from God, a calling from our ancestors, a call to stand up and be heard and represent what's right, be on the right side of justice for all. This is a social justice pastor, they say. But I think it's a great Morehouse man whose vision echoes from those who hail, like a Howard Thurman, like a Benjamin E. Mays, like a Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, like a Malcolm X, like all those who have moved forward to be men who had purpose and vision for their lives and lifetime so that we can benefit from their service. Welcome to a seat at the table, Reverend Green.
Thank you, Brother Steed. It is an honor and a privilege to be a part of this conversation with you tonight. I'm often reminded everywhere I go that there's always a Morehouse man behind everything successful. So grateful to see this conversation taking place tonight and really grounded in this tradition of that comes from Morehouse's social justice prophetic tradition of faith leaders who have been engaged on the front lines.
It's nice of you to say that, but I do believe that many of my Morehouse brethren truly have a stronger calling from God than the post that I sit at. Studied, learned men who have convictions to educate, uplift, and obviously, when you think of prophetic men like yourself, you walk through the Thurman Hall. You have a whole different vision when you think about that. So for me, the whole idea when I say it and think of Dexter Avenue and Martin Luther King and just you marching on, you make us proud. For those that don't know, maybe you should say the last time and share the last time that you went to jail for Breonna Taylor.
Yes, well, tomorrow will make a week that we were in Louisville, Kentucky last week on a Tuesday to engage in good trouble, what we like to call now Good Trouble Tuesdays, where we engaged on the front lines to press the Attorney General, Daniel Cameron, to arrest the cops who killed Breonna Taylor, our dear young sister who was an EMT worker who had been home, resting in her home, and the Louisville police decided to serve a warrant to a place that they have already executed a warrant at for somewhere else, and then took this precious dear sister's life. And so it's been over 100 and some odd days that we have been waiting. The family, this dear mother, have been waiting on justice for her daughter's life, and yet still no word from the government. And so we decided to engage in a nonviolent, peaceful demonstration in March and sit in right at his home. Sit in his home, because if they decided to invade Breonna Taylor's home, we wanted him to understand what it felt like for peaceful protesters to sit in at his home and to call him to conscience. And so his entire neighborhood, his neighbors, the kids who were home from school, all had to watch this take place. And I believe that level of nonviolent moral action is what the tradition that John Lewis and Reverend C.T. Vivian have bequeathed to us. It's to disturb the peace and to get in good trouble, to shift the consciousness. I said often sometimes that sometimes we think that when they talk about restoring and redeeming the soul of America, that we sometimes confuse the fact that in order to do that, you have to redeem the soul of Americans, right? And redeem the soul of people, because it's actual people who uphold these systems. It's people who stand behind the badges, and their hearts can be transformed. And it's because of that that we still believe that there's freedom and justice as possible in this country.
Well, I don't have such a vision for these individuals. I think that if you don't call out where they live, if they can continue to be comfortable. But why don't you explain what happened to you while you were there?
Well, once we sat in there, then they arrested us, and we were arrested one by one and placed into these police vans and in these closed spaces with handcuffs behind our back. There was something special that took place in that moment, even in the midst of those dark times, that we began singing the songs of our tradition, singing the songs of our faith. Ain't gonna let nobody turn us around. And while we were singing, we arrived to the processing center to be held and tied to cages, to be tied to cages and handcuffed there while waiting to be processed and booked. And after that, we were then processed and up to upstairs, fingerprinted and searched and placed into a jail cell for over 15 hours, and some for longer than that, waiting to be released, right? And so we saw, we asked for water, we asked for food that were not given to us until late in the morning, and so we literally faced the most brutal conditions, in my opinion, that I've ever seen. I've been arrested a few times. I'm not a pro civil rights arrestee, but I have had my fair share of being engaged in nonviolent demonstrations, and from Washington D.C. and even to Mobile, Alabama, and Roanoke, Virginia. Never have I ever seen that level of treatment towards peaceful protesters. And then to make matters worse, it is that we found out later on that they had attacked a felony charge on all of our arrests. Before they told us it was going to be trespassing, was going to be, then they added disorderly conduct. But then they while we were yet being processed, they decided to add a felony conviction charge of intimidating an officer or someone who was investigating a crime, even though he wasn't there.
I don't know that that's a surprise. I think when we think about the lines and the dots and the time period, many of us are in COVID-19, and it's a realignment. It's a reassignment. If you have a clock, it doesn't work anymore. Everybody used to get up at a certain time. The playbook that we see, at least to me, Reverend Green, my brother, is a playbook from the 20s and the 30s. This is systematic. When we talk systematic, it is not surprising that they found a way to work hard to injure, but they're getting support outside of Kentucky. When you think about a suit, that they are suing the mayor of Atlanta, the city of Atlanta, for hoping, because it's just a hope, to keep and encouraging people to wear a mask so fewer people can suffer and die. Then we know that it's a little bit more systematic, not surprised, because you can just say the room, you can imagine. Now, how can we hurt them the worst? What laws do we have access to? What can we charge them with that they don't anticipate? And you can believe that there's somebody in the room, well, by the way, you can do this.
Mm-hmm.
It's
very strategic. It's coming from the upper echelons of white supremacist thought.
White supremacist legal scholars.
Sure.
This is in your brethren who have 4 PhDs in theology. These are guys that are studying God's word, the word of other scholars and philosophers. These are legal scholars who have over time perfected their rationale. That's
Yes.
what how many judges they're gonna place on the federal bench. That's what how they're gonna put the new judge over the Breonna, not Breonna Taylor, but the Ahmaud Arbery case.
Yes. System structural. They're strategically planned, and it reminds us of what they did as soon as President Barack Obama was elected in 2008, and they formed this Tea Party to take back the House. And this is that same trend in my mind. This is the same thread of this backlash that happens every time there's, or white lash, if you will, that happens every time there's Black progress. This is systemic. This is a continuation of what happened in November of 2008 when America saw, wait a minute, that you can have someone who represents the underside, represents the oppressed, or at least it represents oppressed people, to be elected to the highest office in this country. And so this is a part of that retaliatory tactic. I think that Donald Trump is a part of that same trend. They figured out who they could continue to sabotage and coalesce it with Russia. Because we also have to recognize that this is about a foreign power that is using and infiltrating our democracy. And we've seen what Putin's desire is, as he's been elected now as the president for the next 16 years to 2036, is that Donald Trump is operating in the same playbook. And so this is white supremacist legal scholars who are global, who are providing a global strategy for domination and tyranny in this nation. And so I think that you're right. We have to uncover that and then begin to figure out how we constructively deconstruct that and also build up something in the alternative.
Well, but the quiet. See, my real focus is the lack of voices even inside the parties that say that they're liberal. Because how can all the women who are not Black, who are not Hispanic, not stand with the mayor? How can these women in Georgia say that this is not harassment and tolerate harassment of a female leadership? You know, that's what's not really being called out. She's being able to sit back and relax and benefit on both sides, and we act like we don't know that she didn't vote for Hillary. You know, we've got to call that out just a little bit louder because she's benefiting from this. These are the beneficiaries. We need to really look at the beneficiaries who wins either way.
Right. And that goes that piece that Dr. King often talks about is the silence of our friends, those who claim to be allies, those who claim to be with the people, those white women who marched in the Women's March at the beginning of this term for President Trump, is that where are you when it comes time to speak to your husbands, your cousins, your brothers, your sons, right, and even to your girlfriends? Like we have to call all the time. You know, I do some of these conversations and Zooms, and white people are asking me, so what do we read? What do we need to do? And I said, talk to you, look in the mirror and talk to yourselves and talk to your neighbors and talk to your friends. Because every time you bring up these tropes of Black Lives Matter and then Black on Black crime, you're then not recognizing that it's systemically tethered to this idea of poverty, racism, and militarism that Dr. King calls the triple evils of society. So there must be some kinds of conscientizing and education that has to take place in order if we're able to truly get to the place of liberation and joy.
Not certain, but while you were there singing, what songs were you singing while you were in the band? Because just like you know it, there are those who now want to hear at least an idea of what cemented your spirit and spoke to your spirit while you were there.
Yes. There was a rapper who was arrested in my patrol, my police van, named Corday, who is from the Carolinas, from Durham, North Carolina, and he began singing "Trouble in My Way." I had to cry sometimes. I laid awake at night, but that's all right. Some kind of way, Jesus will fix it by and by. And then we began to sing the songs of our ancestors ain't going to let nobody turn us around. We ain't going to let nobody turn us around. We began to sing those freedom songs as well as lift every voice and sing and gospel songs that spoke to us. And so we pulled into that tradition, letting our light so shine, letting your little light shine, right? We sang those songs that we heard as children growing up, perhaps, because I think that's one thing that's very unique about this generation, the millennial generation, is probably one of the last vestiges of our culture that has a continuation or a legacy to the previous generation, because we're really grazed a lot apart by our grandparents. So we still have a lot of the grandparents, baby boomer impact of our generation, right? Where we had that vestiges, and even from the previous generation that carried it over. And so we have folks who've been able to sort of be around or be prevalent amongst this sort of trilogy, or so this triad or this continuation of the Black cultural tradition of resistance, because that's truly what we're mourning right now, right? When we think of C.T. Vivian and Representative John Lewis, is that this is a part of the African American cultural experience that we've been a part of resistance and have yet overcome each time.
I'm not sure about the overcoming. I think we laid back on overcoming. I think your generation has picked up a torch that it laid pretty dormant for a minute. I mean, I think it was amazing how I had friends who had to adjust their lens to the protest, and I said, no, it's an uprising. Mm. And they making us look bad. What are they doing? And I said, well, it's not your moment. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's not your moment. You might want to figure out how you're going to support that. I think, part of the challenge from what I hear, Reverend Green, is that more young people want to be trained in the styles of organizing, the styles of protest. Probably more now are asking for those trainings. Yeah. So that they can manage to go to jail, so that they too can organize and understand how not to have the agent provocateurs that tend to try to infiltrate many of these movements. These protests have had agent provocateurs inside. So when you know that God is calling you and being a message in for the gospel, what's that like?
Yeah, it's a deeply impactful, transcendent sort of feeling, because it comes from an understanding or a conviction. I think that people who are called have been convicted into calling, because no one would run into this calling. No one would want to run into sacrificing 12, 15, 24 hours of their freedom to go be incarcerated, not knowing what could happen, not knowing what could happen while inside. And so there's a conviction that leads to this calling. And from that, we are able to undergird and to sort of be grounded in a truth, into a moral value that begins to help us to address the concerns of the times. And I think that's one thing we recognize about prophetic voices, is they always speak to the times. They always speak to the culture. They always speak to what's happening in the present moment. And that's what we are being led now to do as faith leaders, as people of faith all across the nations, is that there must be an uprising of the oppressed, those who have been beaten down by society, who can tap into a spiritual, moral, ethical tradition of love. In my opinion, I think that radical love is the universal truth that unites humankind, and how we can all be grounded in this existential phenomenon that helps us to see our brothers and sisters whole, helps us to see them as fully human, helps us to see them as God's creation, as having the image, as being created in the image of God. And whatever your God name is, or nomenclature that one provides for that deity, that universe that unites us in a universal capacity, is that is what gives us strength to be able to love. And that is how we're able to frame our approach in ministry and frame our approach to serving in this movement, to be able to help the nation truly reach their ideals of love and justice and equity for every person in this nation.
And but how long is this movement going? Most people had no idea. Um, you have, for me, how long? Forever till we have justice. But for you all, I mean, literally, when you say that, that's a sacrifice.
Yeah.
You went in, that was COVID in a jail cell.
COVID in a jail cell. With officers who did not wear masks, with people, we didn't know they were cleaned. The cells were not cleaned. The handcuffs had not been cleaned. It was a sacrifice, and I think that when we look at history, it took 381 days from the day that Rosa Parks sat down on that bus and refused to give up her seat till they were able to desegregate the buses in Montgomery. Is that's over a year of engaged in nonviolent movement and resistance. A lot of folks had to go to jail. Dr. King's house was bombed. There was a whole lot of people who sacrificed, lost their jobs just for standing up and risking their freedom or for the fight for freedom. And I think that's what it's going to take. It's going to take us knowing that we must recognize that we have a true benchmark on November 3rd to really try to resist this empire and fascist regime by doing everything we can to uproot this regime. I think it's going to take more than voting to get Donald Trump out of office. It's going to take actual organizing. So that's hopefully one benchmark that we can measure success. And after that, then we can measure success by actually implementing our reforms and having, hopefully for the first time, reparations as a part of the Democratic platform plank in 2020. Like that ought to be the rallying cries that we know that we do nothing to invest in the racial wealth gap in this nation, that we're just continuing to just march around and rally around and go to jail. But we must have a decisive transformation in the structure of this nation. And that comes first by America repenting and sort of atoning for their sins of racism and white supremacy and slavery by providing the due citizens and the descendants of those who sacrificed their lives to build this nation for over 400 years, the resources that they stolen from them.
Well, that was a lot. Because I think it's even difficult for people to wrap their heads around. And we at the seat of the table work really hard to get people spiritually to understand um, reparations is real. We've got to keep that conversation going. When you hear reparations and you think about the faith, how can we keep the faith and understanding that reparations can be real for us?
Yes, I think it's helpful now that we have a framework for what reparations can look like. Is that America has shown us with COVID relief funds that they know how to find money and to print money to bail out corporations. And so because we know that they know how to print money and bail out and send trillions and trillions of dollars for war and trillions of dollars to bail out already wealthy corporations, that they can do the same thing to repair the harms that America has done for people of color. So that looks like and also you can trace the descendants of those who were slaves in this nation. There we have the research. We can trace it literally by census data, right, and try to help people trace their history. If you have one ancestor that traces a legacy to slavery, then you are entitled to reparations in this country. So that's about 40 million of us here in this nation. And then there is a price tag. You can either decide the price tag by the amount of wages, the rate of wages for 24 hours, because slaves worked 24 hours a day and were unpaid for their labor for X amount of years, and then multiply that by the compounding interest and by 40 million people, and then perhaps you can get a price tag for reparations. Or you can just decide what is the gap between the race, what is the racial wealth gap? What is that figure? If African Americans are 13% of the population, but yet we only own 3% of the net worth in this nation, then that means that 10% of that gap should be reinvested into Black and brown communities or to Black communities that are descendants of slaves. So whichever formula is going to come up to about $250 trillion or something of that sort. And so, or $25 trillion. And so whatever that looks like, whatever that number looks like, however astronomical it may sound to us now, is that we have seen America do it. And so, or we have seen them do it with COVID relief. We've seen them do it with military. They don't have to give us all cash at the same time. You You can put it in an investment account and just pay us off the interest that you owe us, right? So, but there are other ways that people are thinking about reparations, but it must be something that would level the playing field. Equitable distribution of wealth in this country. It helps us to say that, hey, now that we got virtual education, how then now can my youth, my young people go to school where there's the best education, where there's the best resources? Because now virtually, I can go anywhere to go to school. As I want to have access to the best and brightest minds to teach and train our young people in this country. And I think we can do all of that by providing free college education, a free K-12 education, guaranteed health care, and a Homestead Act, right? You can do it another way, just like they did the Homestead Act in the 20th century that provided all the land in the West. We can have a 21st century Homestead Act and provide all the federal lands back to Black and brown people in this country who had their land stolen.
Again and again and again. Because it ain't like they stole it once. They just continued to steal it.
They put highways and took that land by eminent domain. That's just in the last 30 or 40 years.
Right. So they didn't stop taking it.
They never stopped.
Red line. What about faith in the lives of Black people?
Yeah, faith for Black people is as innate to our DNA as anything. The African people are spiritual people, that all people are spiritual people, but African people have always had this connection with their spirituality that has not been bifurcated by this lens of sacred and secular. Right, that in our African spirituality, that the sun and the moon and how we celebrate and how we engage air are all intersectional. They all are part of, as even like he talks about, this circle of life. And so for faith is that we're intentionally and innately tethered together in the universal fabric of God's love, right? And that's what motivates and empowers the universe. And I think that we have to begin to tap into that universal truth, to be able to help others to be able to see the good inside of themselves, and then the ultimate good of the universe is that when we tap into a deeper understanding of faith, then we're able to tap into this understanding that there's something far greater and far deeper than whom we are, that gives us the strength and gives us the energy and the motivation to be able to draw on a well that transforms society. And I think that's what's important. That's what is really leading us to this Freedom Summer. The Black Church is declaring, and Faith for Black Lives is declaring this summer as a Freedom Summer in honor of C.T. Vivian and John Lewis, that there needs to be a reconscientization of what the faith for Black folks can look like in these times. We have colonized Jesus, right? We've colonized Jesus, or allowed Jesus to be colonized. And so we have to reimagine this Jesus that comes from the lens of a Black liberative theological perspective that identifies Jesus on the side of the oppressed, the sides of the poor, is that Jesus Christ is suffering right along with Breonna Taylor. That Breonna Taylor is a bodily manifestation of what Jesus Christ's suffering looks like. And we're just waiting on her resurrection on the third day. And that's going to take us all being engaged in movement building to be able to continue to lift up her name and to continue to call the evil and unjust systems that are holding her in the tomb hostage, and her freedom hostage, that it's time to let her go because Sunday has come.
Oh, no. That seems very creative, but our community and their relationship with church and young brothers like you have made the church accessible. Reverend Sharp at my home church, Fellowship,
Yes.
is made it more accessible. But you have a huge contingent of unchurched, and they've actually, I think, almost unintentionally made hip hop a religion.
Yeah.
And it's filled with false gods and filled with false promises for many generations. But I think that was intentional. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that people are looking to culture for their spirituality, because the Black church has, for a generation, been too tethered to prosperity gospel that we missed the mark of those who were yet suffering because they weren't driving BMWs to church, right? And that culture permeated the Black church experience, and it divorced people from their experiences with church, but it didn't divorce them from their connection or desire to connect with the higher being and a spiritual power. And so now we have to figure out how does the Black church, and I'm grateful that you mentioned Reverend Sharp, who's one of my dear brothers and colleagues and classmates and all of the nine, and one of my best friends, is that we have to reimagine for our generation, right? Like what public engagement and public faith looks like and public witness looks like, because we haven't seen it for a generation, right? Is that we're literally, in Atlanta, everybody was wondering who was going to take the seat from John Lewis now that he has departed from us and gone on to be with the ancestors. And it was this whole, selection committee, and then the selection committee made a decision is that there should not have been a void. Why is there a void? How is it so that no one can say this is the person who is next in line? Because they are part of the tradition, they've been vocally and present. So we're out here scrambling for leadership and succession, when in reality we should be grooming and training and passing the torch. So we're never in a predicament any longer.
Stacey Abrams live in the 5th district.
Yeah, I don't know. She should move. She should move.
I think the conversation is more to when does a king pass the crown? And I think we, there's a tradition in Black congressmen maybe staying past their prime. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's a conflict, cultural conflict, obviously. And I think being a bridge, more of a bridge society, at least with the seat at the table, is key. It's more important for several generations to cross over the bridge than for one generation to cross over the bridge. You got to wait and hope that somebody else is going to let you cross the bridge. Mm-hmm. I think when we say leadership, I think that I'm less on the continuum of leadership and much more on the economic progress of our community. So reparations are important, advertising, redlining, Black-owned media, the creation of Black-owned platforms, I think are really key to the development. Obviously, home ownership being a priority, skill set acquisition that we can actually measure inside of our community. But I do believe that there is a true issue with people staying a long time. I mean, you think about it, they stay a long time. And I think the system suggests that, but I think we've got to figure out how to pivot. So, even in his best days, he was probably not living his best life.
Right.
And our children. Now, the person that I miss is Reverend Jackson, because I don't know that we're celebrating him in the same sense. And I think you should give a person their flowers while they live and want them to live better. So I'm not sure that we spiritually have moved that far. But women, my last question about this, women in this movement, bro, y'all, these young sisters, Black Lives Matter, dearly my truest young sister, Miss Mallory.
Yes.
What are the characteristics of these women, and with whom in the Bible do they remind you of?
Wow. Well, surely they remind us of the women who were the first disciples who took the message of Jesus Christ, because they are bold enough to go show up at the tomb. The women are who are leading this movement, and we as brothers are sitting in the back, holding their items and holding them, making sure they're protected, you know what I mean, and holding umbrellas to make sure that they're safe. But we're working to alongside to support and to lift their visions because for far too long, movements have tried to silence Black women's work by taking credit for it, by Black men taking credit for their work, their speeches, their ideas, their creativity, their energy, their fire, the ferocity, their planning, their strategy. And so now is a time where I believe that the brothers who are part of this movement, the 23 of us who were part of the Louisville 87, are like, we're here to support our sisters, and we're here also to work alongside of them. But there's something special about them because those sisters are not scared. I mean, they are not intimidated. They're not fearful. They're bonding. They're showing us how to build community. They're showing us how to be grounded in love. They're showing us how to be grounded in our truth. I learned so much from Tamika and Linda and the women leaders who are part of this movement, even our folks on the ground in Louisville, Nicole and Dewana Thompson and our attorneys, that they are actually showing us what it looks like to build community and work cooperatively together and without egos, right? Like there's not an ego-driven contest. It's not about who's going to get this to be the last speaker. That they're grounded in a universal truth, and there's so much to be learned from their wisdom and to be learned from their engagement. I was at a vigil last night for Black women sponsored by the Freedom March New York City conglomerate of young leaders who are really prioritizing Black trans women, prioritizing maternal deaths of our Black mothers, Black women who are giving birth to our children, and it helps us to recognize the intersectionality of this fight. Is that it's going to take us collectively working together to be able to bridge this to create this bridge over troubled waters that we so eloquently have talked about tonight.
Yeah, I love the way you said that. The recognition needs to be clear. Brothers need to not be insecure. Take off your lens.
Yeah.
Take out your heart. Remove your ego. Remove any past ideas of what should be and live in the now.
Yes.
I think it's a sifting through that process. Very, very proud of you. I think you said it so that it can give all of us who find ourselves wondering while nobody's handing us the umbrella that it's just not your turn. Sometimes you gotta appreciate it not being your turn.
Right.
Sometimes you gotta appreciate just being the muscle, the girth, the steadiness of it, the support, the protector.
Right.
And not that they can't protect themselves, but just to know that they got you there. No need to be afraid. We got you. I think that's the conversation that has frightened many in an older generation.
Right.
They're not certain what they're looking like. They're not sure. Well, they believe in women as heads of households. I had a friend call me and he was upset about Black Lives Matter. And I said, bro, they run about 75% of all households already, right? That ain't like a new number for you. You don't have to be frightened by that number. We all want to do better, but at least acknowledge what they do, their contribution. Let's not reduce the contribution. So I think it's a new day for all of us. What's the next 90 days look like?
Yeah, the next 90 days looks like organizing communities for Freedom Summer and for civic engagement. Is helping people figure out how they're going to go participate in this election in 2020. Do they have their absentee ballots? Are they planning on voting in person? Do they have their voter IDs in places where they need it in those states, right? And so helping them to think about a plan for voting. And my thing is this: I think that we've received none of our civil rights victories with voting. The Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, and the Federal Housing Act of 1964, 1965, and 1968, respectively, were not achieved by people going to the polls and voting. Is that voting is a tactic. Voting is a part of our strategy for liberation. So we must effectively use voting, but recognize that it is voting plus action that is going to move policy towards towards freedom. So protest and oppose and policy, they all work together to begin to transform society. So hoping to begin that conversation because now all the 18-year-olds who graduated from high school this past year, they didn't get a chance to fill out their voter registration form because of a pandemic. How do we reach those young voters and empower them and equip them to go to the polls, the class of 2020, and vote? And so that's what the next 90 days looks like. It continues to look like encouraging and getting in good trouble to help folks understand that it's going to take that nonviolent moral resistance. Hopefully it doesn't mean I got to go back to jail over the next 90 days because I'll still be fighting this open case. But it looks like encouraging others and training them in nonviolent moral militant action so that they're prepared to go to jail and risk their freedom for a while in order to uphold and shift the consciousness of America.
Yeah, well, next time I see you, I'm not sure about. I know they like to talk about good trouble. I think people get confused. I think that y'all are carrying good news. At the end of the day, I don't even own that it's trouble. What's troublesome is that I have to carry news to you about the fact that Brianna, you don't want to hear my good news. I wouldn't bring this in trouble. I'm not bringing you trouble. I'm trying to bring you the good news. You're trying to refuse the good news. I'm here to let you know I'm sitting in because I've got good news for you. There's something that you need to do, but you're refusing to hear this good news that you could actually free up Breonna Taylor. You could actually do what was right. You could actually jail those. So I'm not sure that it sounds cliches, but I never want a negative and a positive. I always want people to understand because then they say, yeah, they're part of good trouble. No, they're part of good news. They're carrying news that literally is, one, with you, sponsored by God. Two, sponsored by the Constitution. She had rights that were taken and sabotaged, and people need to be punished for that, literally. So at the end of the day, y'all are good newsmakers. Y'all are literally working to carry the good news. Because I think that, for your generation, like I said, y'all are giving access to Christ. Y'all are giving access to the body in ways that, other generations clearly had stopped. You literally, and I was working to figure out, you've got these 500-year-old trees that have fallen. And it's good to see that there's some other black oaks like yourself growing in these forests and creating a canopy. Most people don't understand the value of trees, but it's what grows under a tree that is there, the people that live under that. So as all of y'all get taller and give us all cover, because without you guys, we would not have a forest. Without you, we wouldn't have cover. And y'all are giving us cover when we can't actually get out into that entire universe. So I appreciate you. Continue to grow taller, to shape those who need cover. Because without you, Breonna Taylor would not be any part of the news. If y'all hadn't gone to jail, it wouldn't have made the news.
Right.
And I think that is the good news that is coming from the whole idea of you being a part of an uprising.
Right.
Because we had relaxed for far too long. Yep. We had not pushed. We had stopped pushing. We had been pushed. And I think that Ahmaud Arbery's mother buried her son on a lie.
Yep.
And that district attorney knew it was a lie.
Right.
And we now know that these district attorneys love to live lies and want us to accept their lies. And the truth needs to come out, and we need justice for Breonna Taylor and for every person in our community who's lost their life. And people that have done it have not actually had to pay the price. Right. So continue on. I'm very proud of you. Anytime you're here, every now and then drop us a op-ed. So when you're thinking about it, I don't think there's anything wrong with the piece from the Kentucky jail. Your letter from a Kentucky jail.
It's coming. The letter from a Kentucky jail.
Yeah, I'm just saying. That letter from a Kentucky jail to, and you might write it to Breonna. Breonna, I'm writing to you. know you watching, so I'm here. Just and give, because this generation needs great creative storytellers to reinterpret what you can channel from our dear brother and Dr. Martin Luther King.
Mm.
Because we don't need those things not to be brought together so they can coalesce the spirit of generations.
Right.
We haven't had a good letter from a good jail recently.
Well, I received that mandate and mantle and look forward to staying connected. And thank you for the opportunity to share on this table talk.
Super. No, ain't no problem. Ain't no problem with it. We appreciate you. Much love and respect to you, my brother. We're always here, looking forward to receiving that piece on from a Kentucky jail, Louisville jail, to Breonna Taylor. And obviously, very proud of you and Brother Sharp for continuing a tradition that would make Howard Thurman and all the other illustrious men, Dr. King, proud of what you continue to do. I'm not sure what y'all gonna do next, but I'm really looking forward to every minute of the good news that y'all carry forward. Peace and blessings to you. Thank you so much.
God bless.
All right, everybody, this is Munson Steve. We did a seat at the table with the good Reverend Green, who literally sat in jail for going to the doorstep of the district attorney in Louisville, Kentucky. It was there that he and Tamika Mallory and others literally forged their way down the neighborhood in front of the house of the district attorney. We hope that all of you will find a way to meditate and to understand that they are working so that justice for Breonna is there, and that we all can have a seat at the table, and that justice is for all. You do not have to be in the streets, but you do have to be in the struggle. I'm Munson Steve. This is a seat at the table. We'll see you tomorrow night. Peace.